Welcome everybody. I'm Miri Villiard. I am a visual artist and now currently working for as the grant writing specialist, kind of a mini Holly at the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. And we came up with these different workshops this past summer to introduce some of, I guess, my perspective as an artist coming into the organization and some of the things that I've learned as an actual artist working in the field. And today's topic is public art. Again, from an artist perspective, I've learned at the beginning of these to kind of share, like, this is not, the opinions and views expressed by me as a, individual artist aren't necessarily the views of the organization. I'm just here kind of sharing what I know. And different experiences with different funders and things like that. And then, I don't know, Holly, if you want to introduce yourself.
Yes, I'm Holly Hackett-Rich. I am the Director of Grants and Outreach for the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council. I work a lot with artists, so you can tell people they can call me. I'll help them realize their project. I'll help them find their language, give advice, all that good stuff. So all the things. If you have any questions, you can always send me an email, grants@aracouncil.org. All right. And now Miri, take it away.
So usually I'd put these kind of in order, but there is a lot of public art stuff that I've been working on in the last couple of years. And so what might be helpful throughout the course of this discussion or this presentation is if there's like a specific area that you want me to dive more specifically into. I kind of broke it up into, the intro and project examples. So some of the stuff that I've had funded through grants in the past, some definitions in the fields of, public art and creative placemaking, some thoughts around purpose and community and how you basically are engaging the public when you're doing public art. Some personal opinions and thoughts around like what has been easier as far as like who to partner with as far as making public art. And then a big section that I'm kind of pulling from the last presentation on like where to get funding and who are the resources right now for different art stuff. So if there's an area again that you feel like I really want to know more about that and I haven't covered it as much, just feel free to pull it in the chat. And I'll also be watching the chat for questions or comments or anything like that. And also feel free to unmute if you prefer to speak in that way. It's usually these are a pretty small informal group. So yeah. And actually 1 sec. In the stove. I had to make sure my dinner wasn't burning because I realized I put it in the oven and then I was like, oh yeah, it's done. So husband's gonna take care of that. Alrighty, so diving into definitions. And also maybe in the chat, if you guys if you feel inclined, maybe share what brought you to this topic or what your connection to public art is. That's sometimes helpful for me to zero in on what to talk about. But yeah, what is public art? The simple definitions you can get off of Google are, art is art that is in the public realm, regardless of whether or not it is situated on public or private property and whether it has been purchased with public or private money. Examples include, obviously, everybody knows murals and sculptures. One thing that I've gotten into in the last couple of years is digital projection and film, and that's kind of a cool way to do like temporary public art. In that same vein, there's I've done things like the Chalk Festival and Chalk public art too. So like, again, more temporary stuff. The whole field of creative placemaking, which I'll get into in the next definition. We've seen interactive works, architectural artwork, and I also like to loop in billboards and advertising sometimes because you can get very creative with those beyond just trying to sell a product. And I'll share some examples that I've done with the American Indian Community Housing Organization, which they've just discovered this world of public art through billboards, which I think is really cool and uplifting artists. Let's see. creative placemaking. So according to the National Endowment for the Arts, creative placemaking is about getting artists and designers, community culture groups, arts and research groups, cultural affairs offices, and arts organizations out of their silos and into the neighborhoods and regions around them. I feel like creative placemaking is a term that's come up probably in the last decade a little bit more than it ever did before. It was probably invented in the last decade. And basically, from what I've seen, it's a lot of nonprofits are involved in it, and it's a lot of like different partnerships and communities to rethink how we design the space around us that we collectively share. So it's really rooted in partnerships and community and figuring out how to engage community. And then land acknowledgement. So it's my opinion that all public art should involve Native people in some way. And I just feel, I personally, again, feel very strongly about that. And in my practice as an artist, I've tried to use public art as a tool towards land acknowledgement, as a tangible way to sort of combat the invisibility of Native people that exists where we are. A really great resource for land acknowledgements and also just like on topics of Indigenous issues is illuminatives.org. They had a huge study around media and education and different ways that Native people can be represented and have been represented, and lots of statistics. It's a really interesting and also like beautifully put together website and series of reports. Their definitions of what a land acknowledgement are is that it's an intentional, well-researched and formal statement that acknowledges the Indigenous peoples who have traditionally stewarded the land you occupy, acknowledges the history of how that land was taken, acknowledges the present Indigenous stewards of the land, and acknowledges and celebrates the contributions of contemporary Indigenous peoples. So that's been a big part of the how I got into public art, and what I enjoy working towards through public art is really that part about acknowledging and celebrating the contributions of contemporary Indigenous peoples in the community. Diving into some examples here, these two pieces of plywood that are part of a mural at the Family Freedom Garden Center in Duluth. These were painted by the youth in this picture. They were part of a summer program at, again, the American Indian Community Housing Organization. And we did, in a lot of the instances, especially when I'm working with youth, we try and build up with a curriculum of some kind. And so in this case, we had a conversation alongside Michelle Defoe around the origin of a lot of floral patterns, and also around the Three Sisters and corn, bean, and squash, and that significance to the communities, and worked with the youth to put this together. And then gotta love sirens. I hope no one can hear all those outside living downtown. The two pieces down here were examples of my projection work that I've done. So this was for Modway Ashka, which is The Waves Can Be Heard. And that was down in Minneapolis. And these aren't the actual, I'll have a picture of the actual projection elsewhere, but this was like an interactive projection section, because we were social distancing. So we had to figure out how to get people not all crowding around the main event. And so while people were waiting in line, they could take pictures next to these little mini animations. And probably one of my favorite moments of my entire artistic career was this little boy playing with the little animated loon that I had projected on the wall. And it was just cool to see him interacting with this swimming critter. This I'm kind of pulling from another presentation, but I think it's—
Can I interrupt real quick?
Yeah.
I'm talking about your, I just wanted to get, because I see you're moving on now, I would like to ask some Indigenous questions.
Yeah, sure.
Very respectfully now, I'd like to have an opinion, because I come from Biwabik, Minnesota, and our schools are being torn down, and there's some public art that wants to be made to recognize the schools.
Okay.
We were the Biwabik Braves. I've
Oh,
talked to a lot of native friends and that, and they're kind of like more like, if it's done with respect, it's okay, but if it's derogatory, cartoony, absolutely not. And then there's some people that are like, absolutely not, period, no. What
yeah.
what what is your opinion, or do you know somebody I can talk to? I want to make sure we do it right. And I personally feel like we should hire an Indigenous artist to do the work, because then it's done right,
Right. So
if they will do it, if they will do it.
right. And so so like with the artwork that I assume is being commissioned, like is the theme like dedicated to personifying this idea of Braves, or is it open to like whatever the artist creates, if that makes sense?
Well, we would probably want something to show that we were the Bowabic Braves, and have a brave, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a mascot painting. It could be something that shows natives that, yep, that's what we were. I mean, everybody I talk to does not feel derogatory about it. They want to totally show respect to the Indigenous community. But some people are just like, we are Braves, that's what we are, we're not going to lose the brave. And then there's other people that are like, this is disrespectful. So I don't know what it is, and I'm kind of caught in the middle, and I just want to make sure we do the right thing.
Yeah, good questions. Big questions. So personally, reflections of my own opinions, I feel like eventually that name or that idea will have to change or will change. And so it might be a better idea that like the focus of whatever artwork you create should be like, could be around honoring Indigenous people.
Yeah.
And just be that, it doesn't necessarily have to have that brave theme. And then like when that point comes, when the community is open-minded enough to, maybe make that transition to a name that causes or has a little bit less harm tied to it. Because like that's the issue, is like there are people who feel strongly, right? And
Yeah.
it's harmful to them, as people who feel strongly, even
Like
if
I
it's not.
said, though, our school is gone now. They're tearing it down. Several years ago, we merged with Masabi East, so we're now part of the Masabi East Giants. And so it will always be Bowabic Braves. It's never going to change. But the fact of the matter is how do we present it now moving forward? So it's done with respect, but we do show that we were the Braves,
Right. Well, I wonder if you could like,
how about I email you like tomorrow or something?
yeah, no, that'd be great. And I think too, like another way around that is like acknowledging that piece through signage or something, like acknowledging
Yeah.
we were the Braves. This is where like the history of that name comes from, and maybe acknowledging too, like how that could be perceived as problematic, and having that like accompany whatever artwork is there too.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm not afraid to, shy away from the bad, and any way that we can make it better, I'm all for that. I'll email you or call you. So go ahead and I don't mean to stop. So
No
stop
worries.
your dozens, but that was very important to me to ask. So
Yeah, well, it fell into line with like the whole land acknowledgement is a part of public art. We're all on
yeah,
this land.
yeah.
We fold in
Okay,
like
continue.
the stories. Cool. Well, yeah, email me. So yeah, one thing I realized, I guess, throughout the course of the pandemic was the importance, I guess, of these core components of like creating artwork that is public. A big thing is obviously like along with that land acknowledgement and war sirens is uplifting underrepresented voices in community. Making sure that when you're doing work that is for the public and is for everybody, that you're really taking the time to plan and not like rushing into a decision, because it's ultimately what communities live with. And when you think of like how the whole monument thing has, spiraled in the last few years of people realizing that, monuments just aren't in, statues of colonizers are just not in, and people want them taken down. Like, thinking a little bit deeper about the work that we put up and how permanent it is. Making sure we're paying people. So I always work with teams because I have chronic pain issues, but also like it's just it's great to be able to involve lots of different people and lots of different partners. And it's an interesting thing in public art where I feel like a lot of people in the community actually do want to engage or like to engage. And so like opening that opportunity for the public to actually participate in the creation of work in their communities is a big part of, I think, creative placemaking and, you know, my practice, at least, of public art. And then, yeah, I do not remember what this last one was about, but keep making space. So kind of breaking it down to the people that get involved in public art. Obviously, you probably need funders to fulfill that last goal of making sure the people you're working with are getting paid. And I'll give examples of, you know, all of everything that I'm talking about here throughout the presentation. One thing that I've noted is that it's, in my experience, especially in like smaller communities and smaller towns, it's a lot easier to work with private businesses than it is to work with like cities and institutions that are kind of held to, I guess, more democratic processes or are run by volunteers. And so I'll kind of go over some examples of, you know, specifically the project I've been working on the last few years with the city of Duluth, which is the Chief Buffalo Memorial. But on that note too, like it's very important to, even if you're not partnering directly with your city to do public art, I think it's really important to show up to, if you have a public arts commission, show up to those meetings and voice concerns, voice suggestions, volunteer and make sure that you're, as a citizen, really contributing to the ecosystem of arts creation in your community and making sure that the city knows that it's valuable to you. I feel like in the past, I had no idea that there was a city component to public art or to a lot of the issues that our communities face. And so once I kind of accidentally fell into that into that realm, it really kind of opened my eyes to the fact that like more people really need to get engaged. And then obviously the biggest contributor to public art is the community. Some examples of things you can do to engage the community include like canvassing, so literally going door to door and, you know, getting feedback and opinions. I'll go over some questions to ask when you're working with the community in a bit. Events, showing up at events or having events around your public art creation. So kind of in the background, you can't see it super well, but I did these crosswalk murals throughout Duluth, and it was really like, they were events. So people could show up and paint a crosswalk in their neighborhood, and we went through all the hoops to get, you know, approval on those creations. But it ended up being almost like a block party where like neighbors are coming together and meeting each other. And there was an example when we were doing one of the crosswalks where a family I'd worked with in the past had just moved to a new neighborhood, and she had a bunch of kids, and all the kids were helping out with the crosswalk mural. It was really cool. But then like this new family of all these other kids like started making friends at the crosswalk mural, like painting time, because it was an activity to do to basically get to know your neighbors. Local programs. So I think if you're thinking about like getting funding for public art, I'm not sure specifically if it's all programs of the Minnesota State Arts Board, but I know I've sat on panels where like we've had to turn people down because they're applying for grant funds to do a commission for an institution. And a lot of the time like funding can't go towards that. And so I feel like a way around that sometimes is when you're working with a specific program to do like more than just the commission of work. Like you're going in and doing like community workshops, and there's a teaching component and there's a collaboration component. And so when you build like a curriculum around making a piece of public art, I think that makes it, you know, less of a commission and more of an experience. And then social media. So I'm always engaging people on social media. And then Susanna asked if there is a public arts commission. If yes, links to their website. Yeah, if you go to the commissions portion, and I can pop a link in the chat later, but if you go to the Duluth commissions and boards page, you can find the Duluth Public Arts Commission, and I will share my stories on that front throughout this presentation. So,
Mary, I don't mean to interrupt you, but like, I don't know where your gallery view or how the gallery view happens
oh yeah,
in the workshop. So it was just over the words on my picture. I moved it. I don't know how it records.
oh yeah, I've been moving it around on my end.
Okay.
Yeah, whenever I can't read, I'm like, I'll move you guys over here.
Okay. Thanks.
Hopefully it's good. Yeah, so a core question when you're working in public art that I encourage anyone to ask, and feel free to use all these tools because I'm not in this just to be, the only artist doing this. I hope other people adopt some of these practices. I always like to ask what's missing, and that's a great conversation to have with folks, especially when you live in communities where maybe like the public art has been consistently the same thing for a long time. So when you think of like, I know an issue that the Duluth Public Arts Commission has talked about in the past, I guess is kind of at their root that they were involved a lot in like the sculptures in Duluth, right? But not so much murals. And so in identifying that the city never partnered on murals, I think the Chief Buffalo mural project has been one of the only mural projects that the city has actually been like directly engaged with. But that's a thing that's missing is like, those partnerships on something as simple as a mural. Other questions to consider are, what don't you see in your community? What part of the story is not visible? Because, as artists, we're largely storytellers. And so I think it adds a lot more value to public work when you're looking at what isn't being seen and giving space for that. What don't you hear in your community? Who has a vision or idea? There's plenty of times where I've just gotten ideas from other people. For instance, like Vern Northrup, I loved listening to him talk and share his stories. And I have a mural that's kind of based on one of his stories out in Lincoln Park. But also I'm like trying not to reveal future projects at the same time. So there will be times where other people have ideas and they just need the artists to bring that to life. And so thinking about like who has those visions and maybe not the skills to bring them to life, and supporting them. Who doesn't have access to what you have to offer yet, and how do you change that? So beyond just beyond just doing it for people, like how can you create an ecosystem where people in their own neighborhoods can create artwork? So I think there's an example of when I did those crosswalk murals, and those were one of my first public art adventures ever. It happened along the same time when someone in their neighborhood, in a neighborhood in Duluth, had spray painted some rocks into rainbow colors. And I remember people being, I feel like we have a reputation for having like really troll filled comment sections on the news, but people were like, oh, how come like this artist can go and paint the actual street, but like we have our rocks like power washed because the city went in and like removed all the paint from the rainbow rocks in this neighborhood. And I think, the danger in that thinking is like that scarcity mindset of, well, if they can't have their project done, or if they can have their project done and I couldn't, then nobody should have their project. Thinking about ways to like maybe ease that process, and look at the comparison between like, if you paint rocks in your neighborhood and you don't have city permission, then yes, the consequence is that it gets removed, but how do you make the process easier for people to get approval, or access to the people that you need to know to paint rocks in your neighborhood if that's what you want to do? So thinking a little bit more positively than competitively. What space or resources do you have to share? Who else has space or resources? A huge thing in public art is space. So if you are a business owner or someone who owns property, you right away have, you know, to some extent, the ability to support somebody with that space who has a vision or who wants to tell a story through art. So reminding people that, and then are you taking up space or not getting enough space? Have purpose. Obviously, I feel like one of the first really major murals in Duluth was the Insurgents mural that was up at ACO. I bring them up a lot because of, first of all, like I worked as their arts and cultural coordinator for a while, so I have a little bit of insight into how the creative placemaking model that they adopted really worked and spread around the city. But yeah, so this was one of the first representations of an Indigenous person in the entire city, and like a really great example of like how it is almost a domino effect. When you tell one untold story, it sort of leads into other untold stories being able to have space. So this is an artwork that I feel like really opened the doors for me and other Indigenous artists, because once people saw it, they were curious and wanted to support it more. And so it created this movement in the city. And I still feel like we need a lot more, you know, definitely lots more representation from other communities beyond, you know, Native people. There needs to be artwork for the Black community and for Asian community members. Like there's just not enough in any of our towns up here in northern Minnesota. So realizing the effect and purpose of having just one and how that allows for more to open up. And then these are just loose photos. I did the Chocolate Festival in Two Harbors. This was one of my first years. I did most of this with my feet because I had my chronic pain issues at that time. But an example of like an impermanent work that I think has been funded by Iraq in the past too, where they have the whole street kind of sectioned off, and they bring in artists, and they'll have like a featured artist, and people can, you know, take these blocks of cement and turn them into works of art for the summer. And then another example, I don't have a great photo here, but I worked at Bayview Elementary as a guest teacher, and we got like these recycled playground tiles and we built a whole curriculum around, I think the theme was things that come in groups of 4, because I did like an overview of like Indigenous history in the region, and I showed the kids the medicine wheel, but I wanted them to not necessarily appropriate, right? Because the majority of the kids in the class weren't Native. And so I tried to encourage them to think about in their lives, like where are their groupings of like 4 in the natural world that they could illustrate in a tile that we could then put in their garden. So they did like the seasons, or like there's this really cute one of like frogs and tadpoles, and, you know, applying the sciences to these illustrations. More stuff. Let's see. So these photos over here are from the Chief Buffalo mural as I kind of get more into it. It's still unfinished, so there's not finished photos. Yeah, kind of talked a little bit about maximizing on space. Again, thinking about, are you providing access for whom? Who is this for? So I'm a big advocate for that creative placemaking side of things, of making sure that people in the neighborhoods that you are coming into actually have a say in what goes into their neighborhoods and the art that's there. So for me, obviously, like you can get commissions in other communities, but you know, if I do a piece in the cities, like I make sure I'm working with a lot of people in the cities and providing a lot of opportunities in the cities or the neighborhood that I'm working with to participate and to guide the work, and really just letting go of a lot of my own creative ego and making sure that, you know, what I'm creating is what the community who is going to live by it wants to see, rather than like what my perception of the community is. Let's see. Seeing the relevance of these other things. Yeah, space is magic. Space is half the battle. spaces visibility. So really quickly, I will dive into the trajectory of my public arts career and and hopefully in sharing this, it will give a sense of like how these things work. And yeah, more sirens. My ADHD is kicking in every time there's a siren that goes by. But yeah, hopefully this will give you a sense of like, for artists who are watching, like how to get into public art and what are the obstacles. And then for people who are more representing, you know, institutions or spaces that want to have public art, like what are the resources available and how to treat artists and work with community. So this was my first ever piece of public art. Well, no, I lied. There's one other piece I did in high school, but this was the first piece I did as a professional artist who had already had a career as a, you know, exhibiting artist in galleries and in painting. And this was down in Canal Park. It was a opportunity that came around because Zeitgeist, our local, one of our local arts organizations, had this Better Block activity that they wanted to do, where they would cut off this part of the road and see, have like visioning sessions around creative placemaking and see basically what people in that area, how they would feel about, instead of having a street here, having like a park. And there was like, it was kind of interesting because I feel like as just a community member, I feel like I heard a lot of people who were really crappy that the road in this busy area was blocked off for a few days. But there was a lot of positive feedback on like it being used for art. And so there was over 100 people who came and filled in this giant fish on the street. And once we ran out of space for the fish, or ran out of, you know, space for people to fill it in, then a bunch of kids came and made their own individual fish. And I think I'd gone on social media and I'd ask people what was missing. What would you like to see in a piece of temporary art in Duluth that hasn't been done before? And interestingly enough, we have like no artwork that reflects the water. This really, you know, a core aspect of living, you know, on Lake Superior, and we didn't have public art that was really reflective of that water. And so this fish basically is a body made up of all the different ways that water is used or appreciated in our community. I wanted to put in a statement that said water is life, because I think this was around, well, a little bit after the no dapple movement stuff, but the city said that that was too political. So we put it in Ojibwe and that was fine. So actually this is water first, but yeah, same concept. And then this is an example of a piece, again, like with both of these, it was really just like I'm facilitating it. So I did the concept sketches and then other people filled it in who are in the community. And so this was the Ojibwe migration story that a bunch of students at the University of Minnesota Duluth colored in. It's outside the Multicultural Center. Another example of like large scale chalk art was this piece that I did for the 2019 Duluth Climate March. And it's of a thunderbird and a water panther. And again, I kind of sketched it out, told people where the colors go, and people got to make it happen. And these are, you know, photos of all of the different, well, not all of them, but a good chunk of people being engaged with this process. So then, yeah, this is the Chief Buffalo project, which, as I mentioned, is ongoing. Oh no, the picture for this one decided it wants to disappear. I think I'll get back to that. We actually had an unveiling for this one today, which is like, what was step one for these projects? That's what Susanna asked. Step one. I think so for I think for all of them, I was basically like reached out to by an organization of some kind, and they said, I have an idea and I'd like people to be engaged with it. And I think that's part of the creative placemaking movement that's happening, especially with nonprofits, is nonprofits are just approaching artists and, asking them if stuff is possible. But for like this Chief Buffalo stuff, step one for this was, again, sort of being approached, but it was just to do this back wall with the pictograph, not so much to do the entire walkway, which is what it has turned into. And I wonder, wait, let's back out here, because now I'm like, do I have a section on Chief Buffalo? All right, I do not. So we will go to my website. So for artists trying to build a website, I have all my community projects up here, which is helpful. Let's see. Chief Buffalo. So this is a walkway in Duluth on the, connected to the lake walk. And it's a combination of me hiring a bunch of other artists, getting funding from maybe 7 or 8 different funders, which is problematic when you're trying to do public art as an individual artist, especially when you have to report to all 7 or 8 funders at different times throughout the year. But that's how that project sort of came to be. And it's just been really growing. So let's see. I wish I had more pictures up here now, but it's in process. I'll get back to it. I don't know why this picture is not showing up. Anyway, let's see. So this just got unveiled today. This was a product of, again, Third Street Bakery had reached out to me as an artist after one of their employees had bought one of my canvas pieces, and he was like, "Oh, I work at this bakery. Like, you should do a mural for us." And I never really got back to him because I was busy. But then Lifehouse, which is our local youth organization, they reached out and they asked me if I would teach art and if we could find some funds for that. And so I forwarded them to the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council, and I think they got an art project grant. And so last year, I think it was, and they used that to pay myself, another artist, get supplies to create a mural and do like these workshops with youth to do the steps of approaching a client. So we actually did a site visit, and the youth got to come up with the concept all on their own. Because for me, like, if the youth have ideas, or if my, students or whoever I'm working with has ideas, I'd rather just use those than my own stuff. So, and their concept was along here, there's like a garden, like a really thin sliver of garden alongside the bakery. And so we took pictures of all the flowers that were growing in the garden last summer and decided that we would do like a microcosm of that garden. So when the snow falls, people can still see the flowers that are growing there. And then one of the other youth looked out, because this is on a hill overlooking Lake Superior, and he saw like these treetops, and he was like, that's just a really cool way that the trees frame the lake. And so this is kind of like that macro view of like the details at this site and the larger picture when you look down the road, and then a cookie because they're famous for their cookies, and a dragon. But it's just all this stuff that the youth entirely came up with, and all I did really was just connect them with the client and give them that real world experience of like pitching it to a client or a business. And then we created it, did all the things. And then this is a billboard I did recently, which is, I've really been getting into, oh, my connection is being weird, I guess. Okay, can you see me or hear me? Am I a frozen face? Anybody? Okay. It was just, I think I cut out for a second. But yeah, getting into billboards. And so billboards actually aren't as incredibly expensive as you would think, especially if you're like partnering with a nonprofit. And so lately, ACO has been a really good example of an organization that just hires artists to create work that then goes on billboards kind of around the community, based on different messages and things like that. Let's see, it is 6:16. I do want to leave a lot of room for questions, so I'll just go through these pretty quickly. Oh, wait, Holly's having issues. 1 second. I think it kicked her out. But yeah, this is an example of more like on the fly, community engaged artwork. So this was in response to the George Floyd and Breonna Taylor killings. Yes, we're all here. Texting Holly and trying to do this. So this is an example of, again, getting the community engaged. We did I think it was a couple days before the Clayton Jackson McGee 100-year anniversary, and a lot of those events had gotten canceled, but I was asked by Dance and Creatives, which is a local sort of Black arts organization and BIPOC arts organization, to do something to be engaged with the community, because there was a moment where there was a youth who had spray painted the Clayton Jackson McGee Memorial. And for me, like, I'm always like, well, open space, like people spray paint open space. And so we came down with these panels, and all I did really was like sketch out, you know, the portraits of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and then the fist symbol. And then we basically invited, we had a day where it was dedicated to BIPOC voices, so Black and Indigenous people of color. And it was marketed that way, like this, if you're, you know, if you don't identify under those labels, like please kind of step back and maybe volunteer, or, you know, don't be the folks that are making the artwork. And it worked really, really well. It was like a space, and we had a documentary film crew there and opportunities for people to do music and poetry. And it was like a whole block party. And people asked me, you know, so yeah, so it was 2 days of planning. It was spur of the moment, an intentional day for BIPOC voices. It happened during the 100-year anniversary of the lynchings. One of the things people kind of asked me about was, you know, since we had that graffiti instance at the memorial, like a couple days prior, people were wondering, like, well, are you going to censor people? Are you going to tell them like what they can and can't write? Because it was like F the police and this and that. And for me, it was like, my goal was like, I'm bringing plywood. People can say whatever they want. Like, it is their space and it's just plywood, you know? And if we can't display this as a mural down at the site because it says something, like, we can, you know, we'll find a place for it. But I felt like the importance was the process and not so much what the actual artwork was at the end. And interestingly enough, without censorship, like nobody wrote F the police anywhere on these murals. Nobody like wrote profanity, like everything was, you know, like this youth literally came here and painted his own version of Colin Kaepernick, like big on this mural. And it was just cool because people really like took to it and did what they needed to do to sort of heal and feel good in that moment. And it ended up creating sort of almost like an altar at the memorial, where we hung these up on the fence, and then suddenly people put chalk art all over the ground, and people were leaving offerings and just all sorts of stuff. And that's an example of just like, that wasn't funded by anybody. That was just like, we brought out plywood, blocked off the street and made stuff happen. And then some strategies for public art during the pandemic. So this was a project that was funded by Arrowhead Regional Arts Council again before I worked here. And I had originally applied to paint just this big old blank wall that was here. And it was a friend who worked for this organization, the Seafarer Center, and he wanted that wall painted because it was just gray and big and what have you. And then the pandemic hit. And so instead of being able to do community painting sessions, we had to like fully like twist it around and figure out like, how can we get people safely to engage with making this art on such a large scale during a pandemic. And so instead of doing multiple painting sessions with youth, because it was youth targeted, I designed a coloring page that was just like the silhouette of a dragonfly, and had kids submit. And I used part of my grant funds to like send gift cards as thank yous to the kids that submitted, because I felt like that also it's important to value youth's work and pay them, even if it's not like a whole wage, right? Like give them something that shows the value of being an artist in our society. And so we did that. And then we did one socially distanced painting session from one apartment building that was able to come. And so every single dragonfly, every single fish was designed by a youth in the community in some way. So all I did was kind of create the layout, and then it really just kept building and building. And this wall is huge. I think it's like 90 feet wide on that main wall. We ended up needing to get scaffolding, all sorts of things. But it was just really cool. In the top corner, there was an artist I saw on Facebook who had posted a floral design that she said she hadn't, it was Danielle Laporte, and she kind of posted a vague status about how she wasn't able to use this floral pattern in one of her own projects. And I just messaged her and I was like, can I pay you to like copy this floral for the top corner? Because why not? Like, I'd love to put your artwork on a large scale and in this part of town. We have a little outline of Duluth, a lot of the water again. We have some people ricing, and again, that land acknowledgement piece of it, of like putting contemporary Indigenous people and ideas here. The main hand is offering a sema, and so it's kind of like a the whole mural was sort of like the symbol of reciprocity and transformation in this pandemic time. And then two of my friends from high school were sort of like assistants on the project. And I was like, you guys can, if you want to do these windows, because they kept looking at these windows and I didn't want to paint them. So they were like, okay, like we'll handle it. And they cut out some wood and figured out how to install some panels up here in these windows instead of them being blank. So really like letting my team do whatever they want to do, you know, when I get tired. And so this is in Lincoln Park. So it's got the Enger Tower. And then I think Vern Northrup told me the story of how Lincoln Park used to be like a prime like blueberry picking area, or like the hills used to be for Ojibwe people. So honoring that, again, that macrocosmic like symbolism of like, this is a tower, but then the micro of the blueberries that you can still find on the hills in that neighborhood. Yeah, I think I've covered most of these, but just, you know, one other experience to share was like, I've applied for funding from institutions more based out of the metro area, and it is a struggle to get funding for public art out here in greater Minnesota, especially when you're up against artists who have like great repertoires of like really advanced work that is well funded and large scale and innovative and things like that. But I think it's important when you're working with funders or trying to be an advocate for the arts or for yourself, to really challenge those notions of like, what does groundbreaking mean, especially in spaces where, so in the example, I applied for a grant for the Chief Buffalo project through a funder in the cities. And one of the panelists had written nice artwork, but not groundbreaking, which is just a bad review overall. It's not how panels should work. but besides that bad, way of responding to someone's art, it also just was the first time I realized that it's a privilege what especially when a panel is made up from people in big cities like San Francisco and Las Vegas and all these places. Like, it's definitely a privilege to have access to art 24/7 and for a mural to not be groundbreaking when the roots of muralism and everything is in this activism and stuff like that. And so I always encourage people, especially if you're getting a review from somebody on a panel from a bigger city and stuff, or you're serving on a panel, challenge when people make statements like this, like something's not innovative or groundbreaking. Because I guarantee you that the first mural or the first sculpture or the first piece of public art that happens in a small town in greater Minnesota, that is innovative. That is super groundbreaking because, I want to challenge folks, especially in metro areas, to just try to make public art happen in some of these communities that don't have resources and don't value artists yet. And, things like that. So I can plop this whole PDF in the chat, but these are different resources for funding. I've kind of pretty much worked with all of these different institutions in one way or another. Forecast Public Art is obviously the biggest, or the most public art specific funder in the state of Minnesota. Springboard for the Arts is always posting opportunities. I definitely recommend subscribing to all of the newsletters to get access to grants and grant knowledge. I think Bush Foundation focuses a little bit more on those innovation type things. But innovation does go hand in hand with art. So they have large pools of money that revolve around social change and ecosystems and social stuff. And if you can find a way to incorporate art into those grants, I think there's often a good shot at least piquing their curiosity. Arts Midwest, their grants have been, I think, a little bit smaller. And oh no, there we go. Obviously us at the Arrowhead Regional Arts Council, the State Arts Board, National Endowment for the Arts really focuses a lot on that creative placemaking these days. In Duluth and Superior, we have the Duluth Superior Community Area Foundation, which not a lot of people know that there are some arts grants through that foundation. For Native artists, Native Arts and Culture Foundation has some great lists and resources. Headwaters Foundation, Northland Foundation. If you got youth involved in any capacity, Youth Prize is a great Minnesota youth-focused organization that is trying to reach out more to greater Minnesota. I just joined the board, so that's how I know that. The Knight Foundation, St. Paul and Minnesota Foundation actually funded that dragonfly mural that I had. And then the Toffee Lake Center has a really robust list on their website, and so does Creative Capital. For more information on, creative people power and creative placemaking, there's a lot of great stuff at Springboard for the Arts and the National Endowment for the Arts. And then LISC also has a really robust toolkit. So I'm gonna stop talking. And I think we lost Holly for good. So her internet is gone. But does anyone have any questions or thoughts or things they want me to kind of dive deeper into? It's very surfacey and then deep and then surfacey and then deep. So
thanks, Mary. This was good information. Hibbing just recently hired a community development director.
ooh,
And yes, so she will be, her responsibilities are mainly for business development and working alongside the city administrator on that. But she'll be involved with planning and zoning and other ways to build interest in the city. as a city.
Yeah.
And so I picked up on some really interesting things that you've been able to accomplish since our days at ARAC. And yeah, I jotted down a huge list. So I'm going to be meeting with her and to talk about a lot of things. You know, we've had a vacant lot in downtown Hibbing since a fire disaster, and it still hasn't been created into a pocket park. I mean, we've been waiting, you know, almost 4 years now, and I don't understand what takes so long, but she'll be able to answer these questions now because we've got somebody we can talk to.
Okay.
And yeah, and develop some strategies. I would love to approach her on establishing a Hibbing Public Arts Commission.
Yeah, and doing it in a way where like they actually have some power. Because I think so
Yeah.
the issue I ran into with my Chief Buffalo project was started in 2019 as a pilot project where we're like just going to beautify this ugly area of the lake walk. We did a community painting session and then brought in the Chief Buffalo, his eldest descendants, and like realized that this project could be so much bigger than just like putting up a couple paintings. We could fill the whole walkway.
Yeah.
And so I didn't really,
Grand Rapids is a good model to use because their commission does have some guts. It has
okay.
some good meat. So yeah, I'll probably be talking a little bit with those people over there.
Yeah, ours had only, to my knowledge, they had only ever worked to get like the sculptures that have existed in Duluth for, you know, forever. And so it
Mhm.
wasn't like when I had submitted an application to an outdated link on the website, which
Mm.
then they reached out to me and were like, here's the new, you know, link that we actually are supposed to be using. And they lost the application once or twice. I'm pretty sure it was twice over the course of like 2 or 3 years. And so I didn't get to, I raised like $50,000 or $60,000 on my own and did all of like the project directing of this, you know, this entire project for the chance of being approved by, you know, a commission that had no experience approving murals. And so it ended up going to the Parks Commission, which they sent me a list of questions that I found kind of offensive, like, give us an example of like where, paraphrasing, but basically give me examples of where murals have worked in other places. And I was like, Google does exist. I do not have time to like do Google for you. And then another thing they said was like, we have the right to remove your artwork without consulting anyone. And the issue there was that this project was a project of the Indigenous Commission, which you would think would have the same weight as Parks and Rec and other commissions. And so I was like, you will not remove this without talking to the Indigenous Commission because they are also a commission. Valid, like should be just as valid as these other ones if it's really like something that the city, you know, yeah, wants to validate. So it was a whole ordeal and, you know, a learning process about like working at a city level versus like that dragonfly mural. Just had a friend who had a wall, painted it, like did the community engagement, did the fundraising all by myself. And it took, you know, a summer versus this Chief Buffalo mural where I'm still working on that, like, and hopefully going to finish this summer, but you know, yeah.
Jan, I was wanting to pop in here real quick. First of all, Betsy Olivante is going to do a great job for you in Hibbing. I have no doubt on that. And the next thing is as far as pocket parks, have you talked to Whitney Ridlawn at the IRRB?
Yeah, I know who she is, so she would be on my list.
She's done them for Virginia and Chisholm. And so, yep, I've talked to her too, because we're looking at doing something like that here too. So,
Sure.
yeah. Yep. There you go. That's all I wanted to say.
Thanks.
Mary, I have a question about materials. I mean, I think I get the sense that most of what you've done so far is painting of murals. And is there like I don't know. I've always felt like, okay, well, what if I'm trying to create something that's sculptural, but I want to figure out how to make sure it can last in the open environment. Is there like just maybe not a one-stop shop, but resources for learning about how to go about finding the right materials?
Yeah, I would Google like whatever material you are interested in, or the type of art, and then like toolkit. Because there's a lot of like free toolkits, and those are like just booklets that are out there that a lot of nonprofits will do, where it's like, here's a report and interviews with artists, here's the materials that they used, here's the timeline, here's the budget. Like it kind of consolidates like the template for a project.
Okay.
Yeah, toolkits are magic. Yeah, and it's hard, like climate wise, right? We're in this just super harsh. See you, Jan. Thanks for coming. But yeah, we're definitely in this very harsh environment. Like even the crosswalk murals and stuff I did, like forget about those lasting through the winter. Like they're always gone. Once the winter is through. So, and a lot of like public arts commissions or places that you might want to go for approval will usually, especially if you're working with the city, mostly if you're working with the city, like you will have to submit a maintenance agreement of some kind, and you're going to have to spell out like how things are going to work, how they're going to last, and if they're not going to last, like what is the time frame for when it has to be revisited, and how are you going to pursue funding for that, or who is going to pay for it, things like that. And it's a lot of like back and forth and like negotiating time. I think I sent my maintenance agreement back a couple of times with stuff that I was like firm on, like you cannot remove this without permission of the Indigenous Commission. And it like came back to me that they kept taking that piece out, and I was like, it's not negotiable.
Yeah.
You know. And also, I am not going to come back every year and repaint things. Like I feel like, especially with the Chief Buffalo project, that was a series of beige walls that frequently got graffitied. This park staff would just go in and repaint every time there was graffiti. And so I was like, I technically took somebody's job away by painting these murals here, because you're going to have less graffiti, which they have found that there is way less graffiti there now. But in the maintenance agreement, I asked the city, like, the staff have this capacity because the job has basically been removed. I want them to help with like the touch-ups on solid colors. So today I literally just dropped off a bunch of paint, and I was like, if you see something and I am not around, or we can't do those touch-ups right away, like please let your graffiti people handle it, because I know they know the color red, I know they know the color white, they can pick those colors and put them on there.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
Hey, I got a question.
Yeah.
So, and you don't have to answer this. No, I'm just checking. But no, so that like when you started, I mean, I know that you explained a little bit about when you first started doing mural art and that, but like later after you did a couple of those, and like you said, you were approached by some organizations like that bakery and that kind of thing. So I mean, as an artist though, do you kind of want to, because it helps you to get recognized, right? It helps to get recognized. So how like important is that to you? Like, do you find like that you got a lot more recognition because of the public art and that kind of thing as an individual artist?
Yeah, I think public art definitely puts your work and thus your name like out there a lot more than work inside more traditional exhibit spaces. And I also think like local news media outlets just love public art. Like they just get so like I think it's been explained to me that they just love that like end of the day snippet that makes people feel good, because the news is always so depressing. And so to keep people coming back, they love to do coverage of murals and the artists and like what is happening when the neighborhood suddenly looks different. So I definitely think like as far as like me gaining more recognition as an artist overall, like the media was a huge support. And I think I talked about this maybe in one of the last workshops, but making sure you send out a press release when you do anything. Like it could just be your art show, like send out the press release to your local news outlets, because they're generally are very, they're not always great at like knowing how to talk about art sometimes, but like any publicity is good publicity. And if you get your work on the news, people will start to like, I can't go to like a dive bar anywhere in Duluth where people aren't like, you're that girl on the news, you know? So, and even today when we did the unveiling for the cookie mural, it was just a small unveiling with some of the youth who painted it and the staff and, you know, the bakery folks. We had all 3 news stations come through and do interviews, and it's probably airing like right now. And I think people definitely reach out when, even if they see your face once, like the power of media is pretty incredible.
So when you did that Chief Buffalo kind of piece, that public piece,
Yeah.
I mean, was part of it. I mean, I'm just asking kind of like behind the scenes type of thing that I know that a part of it must have been, you know, that community kind of like involvement and that kind of thing and coming together. And that is really beautiful. That is beautiful when you can get youth, adults and different diverse groups of people kind of working together to do art and that. I mean, and so that's very inspirational, you know, seeing your involvement and progress on that in Duluth area and that kind of thing. So it's great. And thank you for that. But I mean, it's that
I
a
love your-
small part of it is like, hey, that I know how to do this. And it's just like, I want to keep going with this kind of like thing. And that, so that as an individual artist, I want to be able to express myself and I want to do this in a public way and that kind of thing. Is that, was that involved too in like that Chief Buffalo thing too? Kind of like,
Yeah,
no,
I mean,
not so
it-
much.
so like for me, I just feel like I am a community engaged artist and I see a lot of like, I just love like hearing from people and hearing people's stories and hearing what people want to see and just offering my skills, you know, releasing the hands to like do whatever people tell me, you know, they want to see. And so I do get joy about like being a part of transforming the landscape in a way that people feel involved in, because I know what it's like when you don't feel like you're involved and it, you know, it's kind of cruddy. And I think in small towns too, it tends to be that way where it's almost cliquey, where like you can't necessarily get involved in the creation of work or the representation of stories. I don't know. A lot of people have told me that like I'm very not forgiving, but just like very flexible in my style of creating work. Cause I kind of get like, I'm a very social person. And so I don't particularly care what the artwork looks like at the end. Like I can put my ego aside to like watch how people interact with each other and watch how like conversations start and like I just like being around people and seeing what happens when you give them a paintbrush and they've never held one before, you know. Do they panic and like, you know, I don't know what I'm doing, and then they're like freaking out over like it's literally a paintbrush, like, you know. So I think there's definitely for me more of like an almost entertainment value of like just seeing how people interact when they do this thing that I know I'm good at and like I could, you know, paint whatever, and it almost bores me, you know, to be able to do stuff, because then it's like, well, the magic isn't quite there in the way that it is for people who are just like their first time painting in 20, 30 years or whatever. I don't know if that answers the question, but I definitely do too. Like I am strategic in the opportunities that I pursue. So like early on it was, I always take experimental stuff. So like if somebody has an idea and they don't know how to make it happen, I'm like, I'm all for it because I figure out how to make stuff happen. But lately I've been trying to book more and more stuff that's like really on that trajectory of like, is there a native story that hasn't been told about a specific area? And how can I help people see it, bring that.
Yeah, and that's what I see too, that by some of the work that you've done in the Duluth area and that kind of thing is telling that story. Like you talked about these public commissions, kind of like that. For instance, I live up in Grand Portage, and I know Graham Ray is really involved in the arts, but I'm guessing that they probably do have a Graham Ray Arts something commission, or the town or something like that. But I do notice kind of some lack of public kind of art in that area. I mean, there is a little bit, but so that definitely is something that I'd be interested in. So, but is that a way then to approach maybe that type of commission, or that type of committee or something like that, and then to just say, hey, I'm interested in even volunteering my time, but like, hey, let's do something together, and then let's maybe do some fundraising for some material, that kind of thing, for some paints and that kind of thing. But those definitely seek out those commissions and that kind of thing for if you're interested in doing that kind of stuff, right?
Yeah, seek the people with the space. So that like that whole section on space, like there are blank walls all over all of our towns. Like if you know, or if you happen to meet the owner of a building, just be like, have you ever thought about, putting something on this wall? Or have you ever thought about like changing the way, XYZ looks? But definitely like I think it's important to approach people who have that monopoly on space.
Yeah.
Because a lot of us don't have, we're just artists. We make things cool and we struggle to get our own studio space, right? But like, especially in the public art world, there's just people with property everywhere. And I'm sure none of them even, a lot of people don't even know like how to approach an artist, right? Like they've maybe thought about a mural and they don't think it's possible, and they don't know about like grants. Like now you've got this connection with ARAC, like, people who write grants and can help with grants. And so that's another part of the thing when you pitch stuff is, I know people who can get funding for this. Like if I take over this funding portion and fundraising portion, would you give me permission to use your wall? Or,
Have you come across any kind of conflict then? Like, I mean, when you did the bakery and stuff like that, I mean, there was some outside funding besides that. And I mean, just because it's public and that kind of thing, but do they? No, not really?
So for like, that's why I said it's easier to work with a private business than it is with the city, because people who run a business generally own the building, or, are renting that space and have like contracts to do whatever within whatever city code. And so definitely a lot easier if you see a business with a wall to ask them for that wall, versus like telling the city you want to paint some walkways by the lake walk, and suddenly it being plunged into 3 years of lots and lots of paperwork and people not knowing how to approve those sort of things.
No, well, thanks a lot for sharing. I appreciate it. It was a good, nice information.
Yeah, thanks for coming. Are there other thoughts or questions before I go and make dinner or finish making dinner? Poor Holly.